That cabin was worthless. Victor Ward said it into the microphone, laughing with the donors, the mayor, the cameras, the whole polished room. Then Ethan stepped forward. Ranger walked beside him, calm as a shadow with teeth. "Then why were you so afraid I'd open the floor?" Ethan asked. The laughter died so fast you could hear a fork touch porcelain. Victor's hand tightened around his award. Graham looked toward the exits. "Careful, son," Victor whispered. Ethan placed one folder on the podium. "You stopped being my father the day you started pricing human dignity. The wrong man had inherited the key. We had $19, a rusted iron key, and a German shepherd who would not stop staring at the floor of a cabin my family called worthless. That was all I had left by the time the snow started coming sideways across Cedar Hollow Ridge. Not a plan, not a savings account, not even enough gas to drive back to Boston if the mountain decided it didn't want us there. Just a folded bill, some loose change, a key that stained my palm orange, and Ranger standing beside me with his ears forward, his breath clouding in the cold, his amber eyes locked on one warped square of wood near the back wall. If someone had told me a year earlier that my life would come down to an old cabin in West Virginia and a dog listening to something beneath the floorboards, I would have smiled politely and walked away. I was not a man who believed in hidden miracles. I believed in measurements, stress points, water lines, foundations. 12 years in the Army Corps of Engineers will do that to you. You learn that bridges either hold or they don't. Roads either wash out or they don't. A wall either carries weight or it fails. I used to think families worked the same way. Mine proved me wrong. My name is Ethan Ward. In Boston, that last name used to shine before I ever entered a room. Wardstone Properties was printed on glass towers, hospital donor plaques, charity invitations, and those glossy business magazines my father kept stacked in his office like trophies. Victor Ward was called a builder, a visionary, a man who revitalized communities. People loved that phrase. It sounded clean. It sounded noble. It did not smell like damp apartments where older tenants packed their lives into cardboard boxes because a notice on expensive letterhead said they no longer belonged. I came home from the service thinking I could help turn the company towards something decent. Maybe every man returning from war brings home one foolish hope. Mine was this: buildings should protect people, not push them out. Ranger understood silence better than anyone I knew. He was 7 years old, sable-coated, broad through the chest, with a gray shadow around his muzzle that made him look wiser than most men in suits. He had been trained as a support dog for veterans, but calling him that made it sound too small. Ranger was not equipment. He was not comfort with a collar. He was my witness. He knew when my breathing changed in crowded rooms. He knew when my hands went still. On bad nights, he woke me by placing one careful paw against my ribs, patient and steady, as if reminding me that I had made it back to the present. By November of 2024, that same dog was sleeping beside me in the back of my old Ford F-150 outside truck stops and all-night grocery stores. Frost gathered on the windows. My jacket smelled like gasoline, wet wool, and shame. I had been removed from Wardstone after questioning numbers I was not supposed to question. My accounts were frozen under an internal review. My apartment, leased through a family holding company, vanished with one email. My mother stopped answering. My Uncle Graham sent a message that said, "You should have stayed loyal." I read it twice, then deleted it. Loyalty, I was learning, meant something different to people who never had to sleep in a parking lot. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a lawyer named Harold Finch called to tell me my great-uncle Samuel Ward had died alone in the mountains. Uncle Sam was the family embarrassment, the one my father called unstable whenever his name came up. I remembered him only in pieces: work boots, sawdust, black coffee, a gentle hand tapping a cracked foundation and saying, "A house tells the truth before people do." His will was being read in Boston. I almost didn't go. But Ranger climbed into the passenger seat and looked at me like the decision had already been made, so I drove. I did not know then that the key waiting on that polished conference table was not an insult. It was a warning. It was a map. It was the last honest thing any Ward had ever left me. I came back to Boston with 2 duffel bags, a discharge folder, and the strange belief that home would know what to do with me. The airport smelled like coffee, floor polish, and rain-soaked wool coats. People hurried past with phones against their ears, dragging luggage behind them like small, obedient animals. And I remember standing near baggage claim with Ranger at my side, feeling as if the whole city had kept moving while I had been gone. My father sent a driver instead of coming himself. That should have told me something. Victor Ward was never careless with appearances, but affection had never been part of his schedule. When I reached Wardstone Tower, he was waiting in his office 38 floors above the harbor, framed by glass steel, and a view expensive enough to make a man believe he owned the weather. He hugged me with one arm, patted my shoulder twice, and said, "Good to have you back, Ethan. We'll find a place for all that discipline." I wanted to believe him. Maybe that was my first mistake. Wardstone Properties had built half its reputation on words that sounded clean: renewal, transition, community partnership, housing modernization. I had spent years building things that had to be honest. A bridge did not care about branding. A retaining wall did not respond to public relations. If the math was wrong, people paid for it. So when my father put me in the redevelopment division, I read every report like it mattered. At first the problems looked small: a maintenance delay here, a tenant relocation letter there, a repair estimate that felt inflated but not impossible. Then the pattern began to breathe. The same contractors, the same shell companies, the same older tenants suddenly described as non-compliant, the same buildings marked unsafe only after Wardstone acquired the adjacent lots. I remember sitting alone one night in a conference room while rain tapped the windows and Ranger slept beneath the table. A spreadsheet glowed on my laptop: unit numbers, dates, payouts, legal notices. Human lives compressed into cells so narrow they looked harmless. I clicked through the files until my eyes burned. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a cold draft under a door. Wardstone was not improving neighborhoods. It was making them uncomfortable enough for people to leave, then calling their absence opportunity. The worst part was not the money. Money had always moved through my family, like blood through a body. The worst part was the language. Low-yield residents, aging occupancy, resistance pockets. I stared at those phrases and felt something inside me go very still. I had eaten beside men who owned nothing but a cot and a photograph, and I had never once seen them as low-yield anything. The next morning, I asked my father for a private meeting. Victor listened from behind his desk with his hands folded, his silver cuff links catching the light. I laid out the reports, the transfers, the relocation notices, the charity grants being used as cover for luxury conversion. I kept my voice even. I wanted him to understand that this could still be corrected, that whatever rot had entered the company did not have to become its foundation. He waited until I finished, then looked past me toward the harbor. "You've been gone too long," he said. "You don't understand how cities work anymore." I told him I understood shelter. I understood what it meant to come in from the cold and close a door behind you. I said a building was not a spreadsheet because people slept inside those numbers. For the first time that morning, my father smiled. It was small, almost tired. "That is why you never belonged in this business," he said. "You still think decency is a strategy." After that, the office changed temperature. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. Files disappeared from the shared drive. Graham began appearing at meetings I had not invited him to, leaning against walls with his arms crossed, watching me the way a man watches a crack spread across expensive marble. My mother asked me at dinner if I was adjusting poorly. She said it softly, with concern arranged carefully on her face. But Ranger lifted his head from beside my chair, as if even he could hear the accusation hiding under the silk. I told her I was adjusting fine. I told her the company was hurting people. She lowered her eyes to her untouched salmon and said, "Your father has carried this family for 30 years. That was the moment I understood silence could be dressed in pearls and still be silence. I gave Victor 1 week to report the misconduct himself. I truly did. I wrote the email, attached the files, and saved a copy to a private drive. I thought conscience might still have a room somewhere in that tower. Instead, my badge failed at the elevator on Monday morning. By noon, my company phone was dead. By evening, an attorney I had met only twice informed me that I was under internal review for unauthorized data access. He used a calm voice, the kind people use when they already know the outcome. Ranger sat beside my boots, motionless, watching the man through the glass wall. I remember looking down at him and feeling ashamed, not because I had done wrong, but because I had been slow to admit what he seemed to know from the start. Some houses look beautiful from the street because all the damage is hidden inside. By Tuesday, I was no longer Victor Ward's son in any way that mattered on paper. That was the strange thing about being erased by rich people. It did not happen with shouting. It happened through emails, passwords, legal phrasing, quiet signatures, and doors that stopped opening when your hand reached for them. My company badge failed first, then my phone. Then the health insurance portal rejected my login as if I had never existed. At 3 in the afternoon, a woman from Human Resources, a woman who had once sent me a welcome basket with maple cookies and a note thanking me for my service, called me Mr. Ward in a voice so careful it felt wrapped in plastic. She said my access had been suspended pending review. She said cooperation would be in my best interest. She said the words my father had paid her to say, and not one word more. Ranger sat at my feet in the glass lobby of Wardstone Tower, watching the revolving doors turn and turn, carrying polished shoes and wool coats and expensive perfume past us, like the city had already decided which side it was on. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. I called my mother. 4 rings, then silence. I called Graham, and he answered only long enough to say, "You made this public inside the family. Now the family has to protect itself." I remember looking down at Ranger when the call ended. His ears were low, not afraid, just listening. He had that stillness dogs get when they understand the room better than the humans in it. By sunset, my apartment key card no longer worked. The concierge would not meet my eyes. He handed me a cardboard box with what he called personal effects, 2 shirts, my discharge frame, a shaving kit, Ranger's leash, and a photograph of me in uniform standing beside my parents at Logan Airport, all 3 of us smiling like history had not yet happened. I stood on the sidewalk with that box in my arms while commuters moved around me in 2 clean streams. No one was cruel, that almost made it worse. Cruelty gives you something to push against. Indifference just lets you disappear. The old Ford was parked 6 blocks away in a garage I could no longer afford, and when I got there, the attendant told me my account had been closed, but the truck was still mine if I paid the balance in cash. I gave him most of what I had. He counted the bills slowly, embarrassed for both of us. That night, Ranger and I slept behind a grocery store in Quincy under the yellow buzz of a security light. I folded my coat into a pillow and gave him the passenger seat because his hips stiffened in the cold. He refused it at first, stepping back into the narrow space behind the seats until I patted the cushion and told him it was an order. That earned me a look. Not obedience, tolerance. He climbed up, turned twice, and rested his muzzle on the center console where he could keep one eye on me. Hunger changes the sound of time. Minutes stretch. A vending machine becomes a temptation. Steam from a diner window becomes a kind of torture. I had been hungry before, but never in the city where my family's name glowed on buildings tall enough to catch the sunrise before anyone else. Over the next few days, I sold what still looked like it belonged to a better version of me. The watch from my father, the shoes from my mother, a navy overcoat I had worn to investor dinners where men discussed housing as if it were a chessboard and not a place where people kept medicine. Photographs, folded blankets, favorite chairs. Ranger watched each transaction without judgment. That was one mercy dogs give better than people. They do not ask why you fell. They only ask whether you are still breathing. On Thanksgiving morning, I bought a gas station turkey sandwich and split the meat with him in the truck. The bread was dry, the coffee burned, and the wind carried the smell of rain through the cracked window. Across the street, I could see families arriving at a brick house with wreaths on the door. Everyone carrying covered dishes, everyone knowing exactly where they belonged. I thought it would break me. Instead, something inside went quiet and hard, not anger exactly, but a line drawn in the dark. If my family could turn people into numbers, they could turn me into one too. Suspended, removed, non-compliant. A problem to be managed. I reached for Ranger's collar, felt the warmth of him under my fingers, and whispered, "We're still here." He lifted his head and pressed his forehead against my shoulder, heavy and certain. That was the whole sermon. No music, no candles, no grace spoken over silverware. Just a man with $19 left, a dog who would not leave, and the first small understanding that losing everything false might be the beginning of finding something true. The call came late on a Monday afternoon, while Ranger and I were parked behind a laundromat in Worcester, waiting for my jeans to dry because they were the last clean pair I owned. Rain had turned the pavement black, and the neon sign in the window kept flickering between open and pen, as if even the building was too tired to finish a promise. I almost let the unknown number go to voicemail. Something about the hour stopped me. "Mr. Ethan Ward?" the voice asked, thin and formal. "This is Harold Finch, attorney at law. I represented your great-uncle, Samuel Ward." I looked over at Ranger. He had lifted his head before the man said the name, ears pricked, eyes calm but awake. "I'm sorry to inform you Mr. Ward passed away last Thursday at his property in Cedar Hollow Ridge, West Virginia." For a moment, the laundromat's sounds seemed to fall back. The tumble of dryers, the quarters dropping, the buzz of fluorescent lights. Uncle Sam had been more rumor than relative in my family. The kind of name adults lowered their voices around. My father called him unstable. Graham called him a drunk with blueprints. My mother said he was complicated, which in our house meant someone had refused to behave. But what I remembered was different. I remembered a tall old man kneeling beside a cracked porch step when I was 9, pressing my palm against the wood, telling me, "Don't trust paint. Ethan, paint lies. Pressure tells the truth." Mr. Finch cleared his throat. "There will be a reading of the will tomorrow morning in Boston. Your presence is required." Required. That word almost made me laugh. In the last 10 days I had been removed, suspended, restricted, reviewed, and frozen. Now suddenly I was required. I spent $7 on gas, $3 on black coffee, and drove east before sunrise with Ranger in the passenger seat and my clothes still warm from the dryer. The law office sat on the 21st floor of a building that smelled like polished stone, old paper, and money that had never been folded. When I stepped into the conference room, every face turned with the same quiet precision. My father sat near the head of the table in a charcoal suit, silver hair perfect, grief arranged tastefully across his mouth. My mother wore black cashmere and pearls, her hands folded around a tissue she had not used. Graham leaned back in his chair, watching me with the faint amusement of a man who had already read the ending. I had left Ranger downstairs with the lobby attendant after making him promise twice not to feed him anything, but I wished the dog were beside me. There are rooms where a man needs one honest witness. Harold Finch read the will without drama. Samuel Ward's liquid assets, investment accounts, and remaining shares were divided between Victor and Graham. A collection of antique survey instruments went to a private museum. An old truck went to a neighbor named Ellis Monroe. Then Finch paused, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me. "To my great-nephew, Ethan Ward, I leave the property located at 772 Cedar Hollow Ridge, West Virginia, including the cabin, the land surrounding it, and everything contained within its walls, beneath its floors, and under its roof. May he understand what others dismissed." Silence followed. Not respectful silence, the other kind. The kind that swells before laughter. Graham gave in first, a soft breath through his nose. "Well," he said, "congratulations, soldier. You got yourself a bunker." My mother looked down. My father reached into a small envelope, removed a rusted iron key, and slid it across the polished table with 2 fingers, as if it might stain him. "Sell it for firewood," he said. "That place has no value." I picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked, cold enough to bite. Orange rust marked my skin immediately. For some reason, that made me hold it tighter. Harold Finch's expression did not change, but his eyes lingered on me a second longer than necessary. "Mr. Samuel Ward was very specific," he said quietly. "Everything beneath the floors belongs to you." Graham stopped smiling. My father did not move, but something in his jaw tightened, so small most people would have missed it. I had seen that look before on inspection sites, when a contractor realized a hidden flaw had just been found. I put the key in my pocket and stood. Nobody said goodbye. Downstairs, Ranger rose the second he saw me, tail low, gaze fixed not on my face but on my coat pocket, where the key now rested against my leg like a piece of old iron with a pulse. I should have sold the cabin before I ever saw it. That was the practical thought, the clean thought, the thought a man chooses when he is tired enough to mistake survival for surrender. On paper, 772 Cedar Hollow Ridge was nearly worthless. 6 acres of mountain land outside a town so small it appeared on the map only when I zoomed in twice. One structure listed as seasonal dwelling. No confirmed utilities, no recent assessment, road access limited in winter. Harold Finch had handed me the deed in a yellow envelope along with a photocopied survey from 1989 and a warning that sounded less legal than personal. "The ridge gets mean after dark," he said, and Samuel did not like visitors. I thanked him, though I did not know what for. By noon, Ranger and I were heading southwest in the old Ford with the heater coughing warm air in short, unreliable breaths. Boston fell behind us in layers: glass towers, brick row houses, toll booths, wet highways, then the long gray pull of Pennsylvania hills. Ranger rode upright in the passenger seat for the first hour, nose angled toward the vents, eyes half closed but never sleeping. The key lay in the cup holder between us. Every time the truck hit a rough patch, it clicked against the plastic with a small iron sound, like a reminder from someone buried but not finished speaking. I drove nearly 16 hours, stopping only for gas, coffee, and a paper bowl of chili from a station where the cashier called Ranger Handsome and me "Sir" in a way that did not feel bought. By the time we crossed into West Virginia, the sky had lowered until it seemed to rest on the tops of the pines. The road narrowed. Guardrails gave up. Houses appeared farther apart, their porch lights glowing through mist like tired stars. Cedar Hollow itself was not much more than a post office. A hardware store, a diner with 2 trucks outside, and a church sign that read, "Be kinder than necessary." I remember staring at that sign longer than I meant to. After everything my family had done, kindness sounded less like advice and more like an act of resistance. The last 7 miles climbed hard. Gravel turned to mud. Mud turned to frozen ruts, and the Ford groaned in low gear as we rose into a ridge wrapped in fog. Ranger changed before I saw the cabin. His body went still. Not tense exactly, attentive. His ears lifted, his nose worked the air, and one low sound gathered in his chest without becoming a bark. "Easy," I said, though I was not sure whether I meant him or myself. Then the trees opened, and the cabin appeared. It sat at the edge of a clearing like something the mountain had tried to swallow and failed. The porch sagged on one side. Black vines gripped the railing. The roofline dipped in the middle, heavy with wet leaves and old weather. Sheets of dull metal covered the inside of the windows. Fastened so carefully they looked less like repairs than defenses. The front door was thick oak, scarred by time, and along its frame were small carved marks I first took for scratches. When I leaned closer, I recognized measurement ticks, angles, load notes, the private shorthand of a builder who trusted wood more than people. Uncle Sam had not been decorating, he had been documenting. The key resisted at first, then turned with a deep, reluctant click. The door opened into air that smelled of dust, cold ash, mouse droppings, old paper, and something mineral, like damp stone beneath soil. I stood there with one hand on the frame, waiting for the ridiculous feeling to pass. The feeling that the cabin had been holding its breath. Ranger stepped in first. He moved slowly from room to room, not exploring, inspecting. The main room held a rusted stove, 2 broken chairs, shelves bowed under jars of nails and folded maps. A narrow kitchen leaned toward the back, its sink stained brown, its window sealed by metal from the inside. No photographs, no curtains, no softness anywhere. Then Ranger stopped at the small room beyond the kitchen. His paws clicked once on the threshold, his head lowered. He sniffed along the floorboards, crossed to the rear wall, and froze over a square of wood darker than the rest. A growl rolled out of him, quiet, controlled, not fear. Recognition. I followed with my flashlight. Most of the floor was pine, gray, and swollen from age, but that section was different, dark walnut, laid in a careful herringbone pattern no poor mountain recluse would waste beneath a workbench. I crouched and ran my fingers across it, smooth, dry, deliberate. Outside, wind moved through the pines, and the cabin answered with a soft, settling creak that sounded almost like a footstep under the room. Ranger looked at me, then back at the floor. His eyes were steady, patient, waiting for me to catch up. That first night, I dragged an old mattress near the stove and fed him the last of the jerky from my pack. I tried to sleep, but Ranger would not lie down. He sat beside that dark patch of wood until dawn, guarding it like a grave or a promise. Morning came gray and thin, not with sunlight but with a slow whitening of the windows, the kind that makes a room look less awake than exposed. I had slept maybe 20 minutes at a time, waking whenever the stove ticked, whenever the wind pushed against the metal-covered windows, whenever Ranger shifted his weight beside that dark square of walnut flooring. By dawn, my back ached, my mouth tasted like old smoke. and my hands were stiff from cold. But Ranger looked exactly as he had all night, alert, patient, almost solemn. I made coffee in a dented tin pot after finding half a can of grounds in a cupboard, stale enough to taste like cardboard and mercy. Ranger refused the last strip of jerky until I tore it in half and ate my share first. Even hungry, he had rules about fairness. That nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, but because decency, when you are nearly out of everything, can feel like a hand placed quietly against your chest. I spent the next hour searching the cabin with no clear plan. The shelves held mason jars full of screws, brass hinges, pencil stubs, folded receipts, and old survey flags gone brittle with age. A drawer in the kitchen contained 3 spoons, a cracked compass, and a stack of index cards covered in Uncle Sam's tight engineer handwriting. Joist spacing, wall depth, frost line, drainage slope. Nothing sentimental, nothing easy. The man had left behind a house that read like a field report. Ranger followed until I crossed into the back room. Then he stepped around me and put one paw on the walnut square. Not a scratch, not panic. A single deliberate tap. I crouched beside him. "All right," I whispered. "Show me." The room had once been a study, though study felt generous. There was a workbench under the sealed window, a rusted drafting lamp, 2 metal filing cabinets, and a wall rack holding tools arranged with military neatness. Handsaw, level, pry bar, mallet, measuring tape. Everything was old, but nothing was careless. Uncle Sam may have lived alone, but he had not lived loosely. I took the pry bar down and felt its worn grip fit my hand like it had been waiting. The walnut boards were laid in a tight herringbone pattern, beautiful in a room where nothing else bothered to be. That bothered me most. Poor men do not waste good wood where no one will admire it. Engineers do not hide precision without reason. I found the first seam near the wall, almost invisible beneath a line of dust. My pulse moved into my throat. Ranger sat close enough that his shoulder pressed my arm, warm, steady, grounding me. I worked slowly, sliding the pry bar beneath the edge and lifting with care. The board resisted, then gave with a soft wooden sigh. Not a crack, not decay, a release. One board came up, then another. Beneath them was not dirt, not rot, not the crawl space I expected, but a square concrete cavity, dry and clean, lined with black plastic sheeting. My flashlight beam fell inside and caught the dull green edge of a steel box. For a few seconds I did not move. The cabin seemed to narrow around me. Ranger lowered his head and sniffed once, then looked up at my face as if checking whether I understood. The box was military issue, heavy, sealed with 2 latches and a lock darkened by age. Painted across the top in fading white letters were 4 words, S. Ward, for Ethan. My name on that box felt impossible, personal, like hearing a voice come up through the earth. My hands shook when I lifted it out, not badly, just enough that the metal whispered against the concrete. The rusted key from the will hung on my ring beside the truck key. I tried it without hope. It slid in cleanly. The lock turned. Inside, the smell rose first. Paper, leather, cold metal. The dry breath of years protected from damp. There was a canvas pouch filled with gold American Eagle coins, each one wrapped in soft cloth. There were old savings bonds, a black leather journal, a packet of photographs, a small encrypted drive sealed in a plastic case, and beneath all of it a letter addressed in Uncle Sam's handwriting. "Ethan, when they have taken everything they can reach, read this before you decide what kind of man you want to become." I sat back on the floorboards because my knees had forgotten their job. Ranger pressed his head beneath my hand, and for the first time since Boston, I felt something other than hunger, anger, or cold. I felt the terrifying weight of being trusted by a dead man who had known, somehow, that the family would one day mistake my conscience for weakness. I did not open the letter first. I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to tear it open right there on the floor and let Uncle Sam explain everything in one clean breath from the grave. But years in uniform teach a man that when you find something important, you do not rush it. You secure the scene. You slow your hands. You make sure fear does not get to read before judgment does. So I laid every item from the box on the workbench beneath the sealed window, while Ranger sat by the door like a guard posted outside a chapel. The gold coins came first, heavy and bright in their cloth sleeves, too beautiful for that room and too practical to be decoration. Then the savings bonds, brittle at the folds. Then the photographs, apartment buildings with boarded windows, men in suits shaking hands at ribbon cuttings, my father younger and smiling beside city officials. Graham standing near him with a folder tucked under one arm. At first, the images looked harmless, the usual theater of public good. Then I saw Uncle Sam's notes on the backs. Same contractor, same fund, same people moved out before inspection, same lie wearing a cleaner suit. The journal was worse, not loud, not dramatic, worse because it was precise. Samuel Ward had written like an engineer even when his heart was breaking. Dates, permit numbers, foundation reports. Charity transfers, names of tenants, all adults, many older, some veterans. Some retired workers who had lived in the same buildings for 20 or 30 years before Wardstone discovered their homes were suddenly unfit for continued occupancy. Uncle Sam had circled that phrase again and again until the ink nearly cut through the paper. In the margin he wrote, "A home does not become worthless because the people inside it are poor." I sat with that sentence for a long time. The stove had gone cold. Wind moved softly against the metal window coverings. Ranger rested his chin on my boot, and I felt the warmth of him keeping me anchored to the room, while the past opened under me like a second basement. Uncle Sam had not been unstable. He had been inconvenient. There is a difference, and powerful families spend fortunes making sure nobody learns it. According to the journal, he had worked as Wardstone's senior structural consultant until 2011. When he refused to sign off on a redevelopment package built on manipulated inspection reports. He found shell companies tied to Graham. He found grant money marked for veteran housing diverted into luxury conversions. He found relocation payments delayed until desperate people accepted less than they were owed. He brought the evidence to Victor privately first. That detail hurt more than I expected. He had tried to give my father a chance. The next entries changed tone, not wildly. Not incoherently, just quieter. Samuel's contracts were canceled. His medical history was whispered about. Old arguments were retold as symptoms. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. The family did not defeat him in one swing. They surrounded his name with doubt until truth sounded like a rumor and conscience sounded like illness. I finally opened the letter with a pocket knife. Careful not to tear the paper, Ethan, it began. "If you are reading this, they have reached for you too. I am sorry for that. I hoped your service would carry you far enough from this family's machinery. But men like Victor do not fear weakness. They fear anyone who still knows the difference between value and worth." I stopped there, because my eyes had blurred and I was too tired to pretend it was the dust. Ranger lifted his head, ears soft, and placed one paw on my knee. The letter continued, "Do not use this to become cruel. Cruelty is the family business, even when it wears Charity's name. Use the truth carefully. Let the law do what anger cannot. And when it is over, build something that gives people back the dignity they were told they could not afford." I read those lines 3 times. Outside, the mountain was quiet in the way old places are quiet, not empty, only waiting. For the first time, Uncle Sam felt less like a ghost and more like a man sitting across from me, tired but unbroken, handing me the last honest blueprint he had ever drawn. Not for a building, for a choice. I looked at the gold, the files, the photographs, the names. Then I looked at Ranger. "We don't do this for revenge," I said. My voice sounded rough, almost unfamiliar. "We do it right." Ranger's tail moved once against the floor. A soft thump in the cold room, agreement maybe, or mercy. I left Cedar Hollow Ridge with the steel box wrapped in an old canvas tarp and Ranger riding beside it, like he understood its weight better than I did. The mountain road was slick from a night of freezing rain, and the Ford moved slowly, its tires crunching through thin ice that cracked like old bones underfoot. I had expected to feel powerful after finding the gold, the journals, the files. Instead, I felt careful. There is a difference. Power makes a man reach too fast. Care makes him check the bridge before asking others to cross. The first town with a bank was still 2 hours away, and I did not trust a bank. Not yet. My father's hands had a way of reaching through systems most people believed were solid. So I drove to a family-owned coin shop in Charleston with bars on the windows, a bell above the door, and a gray-haired owner named Dennis who looked at Ranger first and me second. That made me like him. I sold only 6 coins, enough to breathe. Enough to stop thinking like a cornered animal. Dennis counted out $6,000 in clean bills, slid them across the counter, and said, "Whatever you're carrying, son, carry it slow." I nodded because advice sounds different when it comes from someone who has not asked what your pain is worth. My first purchase was not a laptop. It was not a phone. It was 2 hot meals from a diner down the road, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and coffee strong enough to sand wood. I ordered Ranger grilled chicken with rice, no seasoning, and when the waitress brought it in a white bowl, he looked at me before eating, as if asking permission to believe in good things again. I laughed then, one short, cracked sound that surprised both of us. The waitress smiled, but did not comment. Good people know when silence is part of the service. That night, I checked into a roadside motel outside Charleston under the name E. Miller, paying cash for 3 nights. Room 114 smelled faintly of bleach, dust, and the ghost of cigarette smoke buried under floral cleaner. The carpet was tired. The curtains did not close evenly. The heater rattled every 11 minutes like it was clearing its throat before bad news. To me, it felt like safety. I placed the steel box on the table, set a chair beneath the door handle, and spread Uncle Sam's documents across the bedspread in careful rows. Ranger took his post between the window and the door. That was when the motel room became something more than shelter. Not a place for revenge, a place for order. I bought a laptop from an office supply store, 2 encrypted drives, a prepaid phone, and a small scanner that jammed every 5th page unless I fed it slowly, like an old horse with trust issues. For 2 days I scanned everything: inspection reports, grant applications, email printouts, transfer records, notes in Samuel's narrow handwriting. I made 3 digital copies and hid them in 3 different places. I ate standing up, I slept in pieces. When my hands shook, Ranger pressed his body against my leg until I remembered I was not back in some other life, not lost in smoke, not waiting for the next thing to fall. I was in West Virginia, in a bad motel with clean evidence and a dog who refused to let me disappear into my own head. On the 3rd afternoon, I called Naomi Pierce. Her name appeared 6 times in Uncle Sam's journal, former federal housing prosecutor, pushed out after pursuing Wardstone too aggressively. Honest, Samuel had written beside her name. Angry but honest. She answered on the 5th ring with a voice like a closed door. I don't take inheritance disputes. Neither do I said. This is about Wardstone properties. Silence. Then who is this? I told her my name. That earned me another silence, longer and sharper. Victor Ward's son? Not in any way he'd admit this week. She did not laugh. I respected that. I told her I had Samuel Ward's records, financial documents, inspection files, and evidence connected to federal housing funds. I told her I did not want my father's money. I did not want his chair, his office, or his name polished clean for me to inherit. Then what do you want, Mr. Ward? She asked. I looked at the papers covering the bed, each one tied to someone who had been treated like an inconvenience with a mailing address. I want every person they erased to have a name again. For the first time, Naomi Pierce breathed into the phone like the door had opened an inch. Where are you? She asked. Ranger lifted his head. Outside, rain tapped the motel window in small patient knocks, and I understood that survival had ended. The work had begun. 3 weeks later, Victor Ward stood beneath a chandelier at the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, accepting applause from people who had never wondered where displaced tenants slept after the cameras left. The ballroom glowed with old Boston money, white tablecloths, crystal glasses, black dresses, navy suits, polished shoes, silver hair, soft laughter. On the stage behind my father, a gold banner read Humanitarian Builder of the Year. I stared at those words from the back of the room and felt no anger at first, only distance. The kind you feel when looking at a house you once lived in after strangers have changed the locks. Naomi Pierce stood beside me in a charcoal suit, her expression unreadable, her hands folded around a slim leather folder. Ranger sat at my left leg, calm as carved stone, his black service vest brushed clean, his amber eyes moving over the room with quiet discipline. A few people recognized me. I saw it happen in small waves, a widened eye, a whisper behind a champagne flute, a hand touching another's sleeve. The vanished son had returned. Worse, he had returned sober, shaved, steady, and not alone. My mother saw me first. Marla Ward was seated at the front table, pearls at her throat, her face arranged for public grief, though no one had died that night except the story she preferred. Her lips parted slightly. For 1 second, something almost human crossed her face. Fear, maybe, or regret arriving too late to be useful. Graham leaned toward my father and murmured something. Victor did not turn right away. He finished shaking the mayor's hand, accepted the glass plaque, and smiled into the applause with practiced warmth. Then his eyes found mine. The smile remained. Everything behind it froze. I had imagined that moment so many times in the motel room that I expected my body to betray me. Shaking hands, tight chest, old panic blooming under my ribs. Instead, Ranger pressed his shoulder lightly against my knee and I breathed in, out, here, now. Victor stepped to the microphone. Tonight, he began, is not about buildings, it is about people. Naomi's jaw tightened beside me. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in hearing a thief praise doors he had closed. Victor spoke about dignity, opportunity, restoration. He used every clean word money could buy. Then Naomi walked forward. She did not rush, that mattered. Truth does not need to sprint when it has been waiting years. 2 federal investigators entered from the side doors with Agent Laura Bell, a compact woman in a dark suit who carried herself with the calm weight of procedure. The room noticed them before Victor did. Applause thinned into confusion. Silverware quieted. A photographer lowered his camera. Agent Bell reached the stage as Victor paused, still holding the award. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice clear enough to cross the ballroom without effort, "we have federal warrants related to Wardstone properties, the Samuel Ward files, and misappropriation of housing funds." For the first time in my life, I saw my father with no room prepared for him. No private office, no controlled narrative, no attorney whispering from behind mahogany. Just a bright room, a public stage, and the sound of his own breathing caught too close to the microphone. "This is absurd," he said smoothly. "My son is unwell. He has been angry since leaving the company." There it was, the old family tool. Make conscience sound like instability. I stepped forward before Naomi could stop me. Ranger moved with me, not pulling, not guiding, simply accompanying. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked at the faces turned toward us. Donors. Executives, reporters, people who had applauded because applause is easier than questions. "My great-uncle Samuel Ward wrote something before he died," I said. My voice was not loud, but the room had become so still it did not need to be. "He wrote that my father would call decency weakness. He wrote that people become easy to harm when powerful men first turn them into categories." Naomi opened the folder and placed copies of the documents on the podium. Transfer. Records, inspection notes, grant files, names. Adult men and women who had paid rent, worked jobs, served communities, cared for neighbors, and been reduced to obstacles on a development schedule. "These are not units," I said. "They are people. They had names before Wardstone made them numbers." Victor stared at me then, not with rage, but with disbelief, as if the greatest betrayal was not what he had done, but that I had refused to inherit his silence. Agent Bell guided him away from the microphone with quiet professionalism. No shouting, no struggle, just the soft collapse of a myth under the weight of paper. As he passed me, my father whispered, "You destroyed this family." I looked down at Ranger, then back at him. "No," I said. "I just opened the floor." The investigation did not end that night under the chandelier. Real justice almost never arrives with music swelling and curtains falling. It comes in envelopes, hearings, sworn statements, signatures, delays, appeals, and mornings when a man wakes up wondering whether truth is strong enough to survive paperwork. For months, Naomi and Agent Bell walked the evidence through every door my family had once believed they owned. Wardstone's accounts were frozen. The charity foundation was audited. Contractors began talking. Former employees remembered things they had been paid to forget. My mother moved quietly through it all, never defending Victor in public, never apologizing to me in private. Maybe silence was the only language she had left. Graham resigned first. Victor held longer, as men like him often do, mistaking stubbornness for innocence. But paper has its own patience. Uncle Sam had kept too much, dated too carefully, copied too widely. By spring, Wardstone Properties was no longer a monument to my father's brilliance. It was a crime scene with office plants. Restitution funds were ordered. Properties were sold. The shell companies folded into the daylight one by one. Adults who had been pushed from their homes received checks, legal help, and, in some cases, the simple dignity of hearing someone official say, "What happened to you was wrong." I did not realize how much that sentence mattered until I watched a retired machinist named Paul Reyes hold his letter with both hands and stare at it for nearly a full minute without speaking. He was not celebrating. He was being believed. There is a difference. When my legal share of the estate was finally released, Naomi asked what I planned to do with it. We were sitting in a quiet diner outside Charleston, Ranger asleep beneath the booth, his paws twitching as if chasing some peaceful dream through tall grass. I looked at the check on the table. The number was large enough to reopen old temptations, large enough for comfort, distance, revenge dressed as luxury. For a moment I thought of Boston penthouses, clean suits, rooms where nobody knew what it felt like to count gas money in quarters. Then Ranger sighed in his sleep, and I remembered the cabin stove ticking in the dark, Uncle Sam's letter under my shaking hands, and that line in his journal, "A home does not become worthless because the people inside it are poor." "I'm going back to Cedar Hollow," I said. Naomi smiled like she had expected nothing else. The cabin took 8 months to restore. Not renovate, restore. There is a difference there, too. Renovation erases what came before and charges more for the silence. Restoration listens. I replaced the rotten beams but kept the original frame. I took the metal plates off the windows and let light enter rooms that had spent years bracing against the world. I repaired the porch, plank by plank, until it could hold 2 rocking chairs, a sleeping dog, and the weight of an evening without fear. The walnut floor in the back room stayed exactly where it was. I sealed it, polished it, and left one narrow brass line around the square Ranger had guarded through that first long night. Above it, I hung a small framed note in Uncle Sam's handwriting. "Pressure tells the truth." By the following winter, the cabin had a new name carved into a cedar sign at the road. The Samuel Ward Dignity House. It was not a shelter, not a clinic, not some grand institution with a donor wall and speeches. It was a quiet place where veterans, displaced workers, and people who had been made to feel disposable could stay for a few weeks, breathe mountain air, cook real food, sit beside the stove, and remember that needing help did not make them less human. Ranger became the first greeter, though greeter was too small a word for what he did. He met every guest with the same calm, measuring gaze he had once given that floor. He never rushed anyone. He never demanded trust. He simply offered his presence and let people come back to themselves at their own speed. Some evenings, when the ridge turned blue and the pines stood black against the sky, I would sit on the porch with him and think about the family I lost. Then I would hear laughter from the kitchen, dishes being washed, boots drying near the stove, someone saying thank you in a voice rough with surprise. And I would understand I had not lost a family. I had only been delivered from the wrong definition of one. My father left me nothing he meant as kindness. My uncle left me a key. Ranger showed me where to use it, and beneath those old floorboards I found more than gold, more than evidence, more than the end of a lie. I found the beginning of a life built on something my family never learned how to value: people. If this story moved you, let me know which moment stayed with you most, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe stories like Ethan and Ranger's deserve to be heard, don't forget to like and subscribe.